Have you ever wondered why some decisions feel yours, yet carry the invisible weight of someone else's design? Imagine standing at a crossroads, sensing infinite possibilities, yet a shadowy force subtly nudges one path over another. What if the choices you believe define your destiny are not entirely yours? Reality itself may be a stage, and your autonomy, a carefully crafted illusion. Tonight, we will uncover the hidden mechanisms that shape your thoughts, desires, and the very reality you inhabit. This is not a tale of fiction. It is the concealed architecture of influence, the invisible currents that guide the river of human behavior. By the end of this exploration, you will not only recognize these forces, but understand how to reclaim the sovereignty of your mind. Every society, every culture, every system of human interaction is built upon invisible currents, subtle mechanisms of persuasion that shape thought and behavior without overt force. These forces operate like an intricate undercurrent beneath the surface of perception, guiding the flow of decisions, preferences, and beliefs in ways that are almost imperceptible. From the moment you wake to the moment you sleep, from the advertisements that brush against your subconscious to the casual words exchanged in conversation, countless influences converge upon your mind, crafting what you perceive as free choice. This is the quiet architecture of influence, a structure so embedded in daily life that it becomes nearly invisible, yet its effects are profound. Dark psychology, at its core, is the study of these mechanisms. It examines the hidden levers and triggers that guide human thought and behavior, not as a method of control for the uninitiated, but as a revelation of the fragility and plasticity of perception itself. It asks questions few dare to confront. How much of what you desire is genuinely yours? How often are your fears, your ambitions, your sense of self actually echoes of external suggestion? And more unsettling, what is left of true autonomy when the threads of influence weave themselves seamlessly into the fabric of your consciousness? Consider the way language alone can shape thought. Words are not merely tools for communication, they are vectors of meaning that carry emotional resonance and implicit suggestion. A single phrase, delivered with subtle intonation, can prime a chain of decisions before conscious awareness ever engages. Similarly, images, symbols, and even fleeting glances carry a power that bypasses rational analysis, directly embedding impressions into the subconscious mind. Each moment in which you feel you are acting independently may in fact be the result of layers of suggestion accumulated over decades of exposure to culture, media, and interpersonal dynamics. Time itself adds a complex dimension to this architecture. When viewed linearly, life appears sequential and self-directed, yet beneath the surface, patterns of influence operate in loops and rhythms, recurring without recognition. Choices are rarely isolated events. They are cumulative outcomes, shaped by previous encounters, conditioned expectations, and subtle emotional cues. In this sense, human decision-making is never entirely immediate. It is an echo of past manipulations, experiences, and suggestions, often leaving the conscious mind unaware of the forces guiding it. Even relationships, those most intimate connections, are sites of subtle influence. The people around you, knowingly or unknowingly, exert sway over thoughts and behaviors. Emotional responses, social pressures, and unspoken hierarchies guide decisions in ways so seamless that the mind perceives them as spontaneous, authentic. The architecture of influence does not operate solely in obvious forms of coercion. It thrives in the spaces between awareness and instinct, in the quiet corners of perception where attention is not fully present. And yet within this intricate and often disquieting web, there lies a key: awareness. To perceive the invisible currents is not merely to understand manipulation, it is to glimpse the underlying structure of consciousness itself. Awareness allows the observer to distinguish between suggestion and authentic choice, to trace the patterns that previously went unnoticed, and to reclaim agency within a world designed to subtly steer thought and action. The subtlety of influence, when recognized, transforms from a source of vulnerability into a tool of insight, a lens through which the mind can perceive both its own workings and the hidden architectures of the world. This is not a lesson in cynicism, nor is it a condemnation of human society. It is an invitation into depth, a call to understand that life, perception, and choice are far more layered than they appear. The structures that manipulate and guide are reflections of the same principles that allow consciousness to grow, adapt, and master itself. By exploring these hidden currents, by tracing the subtle architecture of influence, you confront not only the external forces that shape decisions, but also the inner shadows that shape perception, revealing the profound interconnectedness of mind, environment, and reality. Imagine for a moment that your choices, the ones you hold closest to your sense of identity, are not entirely your own. Picture a life where the feeling of freedom is present, yet subtle. Invisible hands are guiding your steps, nudging decisions, and shaping desires without ever announcing themselves. This is the realm where the line between autonomy and influence blurs, where the mind, though seemingly awake, is partially illuminated by shadows it cannot fully discern. It is not always a sinister force imposing itself externally. Often, it is the interplay between the world and the hidden recesses of your own psyche. The illusions of freedom are woven so delicately that they become indistinguishable from authenticity itself. Consider the moments when you act impulsively, when a choice feels instinctual, yet later you question why you acted as you did. That fleeting impulse is rarely as spontaneous as it appears. Subtle cues, environmental signals, social dynamics, and even minute patterns of suggestion may have orchestrated it, converging in the mind like invisible strings tugging at your attention. Each interaction you experience, the words of a friend, the tone of a news segment, a fleeting advertisement, a glance from a stranger, carries potential influence. Some of these forces are obvious, some entirely subconscious, but all contribute to shaping the mental landscape in which you make decisions. The quietest nudges are often the most potent, invisible, until their impact manifests as choice. This subtle orchestration is so pervasive that it extends into the very way you perceive reality. The mind itself becomes a stage, and your consciousness, the actor convinced of improvisation while following an unseen script. The paradox is profound. To perceive manipulation is to become conscious of influence, yet the recognition of it does not instantly liberate you. Influence is not a singular act of control, it is a continuous flow, a cumulative layering of suggestion, emotion, and expectation. Understanding its depth requires acknowledging the multidimensionality of human decision-making. A single decision is rarely an isolated event, it is the intersection of countless micro-influences shaped both externally and internally, often imperceptibly. Even more disorienting is the realization that influence is rarely malicious in intent. Often it arrives in forms that appear nurturing, beneficial, or innocuous. A comforting word, a carefully phrased question, a subtle appeal to empathy, each can steer thought and behavior as surely as overt command. The mind, in its desire for meaning, often embraces these nudges, interpreting them as natural extensions of choice rather than external impositions. And yet, within this apparent surrender lies a door to mastery. To see the unseen forces shaping thought is to step into the threshold between unconscious reaction and conscious awareness. Human relationships are the most complex arenas of this hidden influence. Emotional bonds, social expectations, and unspoken hierarchies create currents that subtly pull in directions often unnoticed. The love of a friend, the approval of a mentor, even the quiet judgment of a stranger can become instruments of guidance, shaping decisions in ways that feel internally generated. The more we rely on external affirmation, the more fertile the ground becomes for subtle nudges to take root. Awareness, in this landscape, is the compass that allows navigation through a sea of invisible currents, revealing not only how external factors shape us, but also how internal predispositions respond to them. And here lies the ultimate tension. Influence is unavoidable, yet its recognition transforms the landscape of power. The more we perceive these currents, the less they control us, and the more they become instruments for insight rather than subjugation. To understand manipulation without judgment is to reclaim agency, not through resistance alone, but through conscious engagement. The recognition of these hidden levers does not eliminate influence. It elevates the observer, revealing the architecture of choice as both external mechanism and inner reflection. Thus, freedom is never the absence of influence. It is the deliberate choice to act with awareness amid forces both seen and unseen. The illusion of autonomy dissolves only when perception extends into the depths of subtle currents, when observation penetrates the patterns previously hidden. In this realization, the shadows that once seemed threatening become mirrors, offering insight into the nature of mind, perception, and reality. The space between impulse and action, once invisible, becomes the terrain of sovereignty, a mystical arena where consciousness can awaken to its own power and discernment. At the center of all human experience lies a question both simple and profoundly complex. What truly governs our choices? If influence weaves itself into the very fabric of perception, if subtle currents guide thought without our awareness, then what is the nature of freedom, and where does the self truly reside? This is the domain where dark psychology intersects with metaphysics, where the study of human manipulation becomes a doorway to understanding consciousness itself. To comprehend the architecture of influence is not merely to understand behavior. It is to glimpse the scaffolding of reality as it interacts with mind, desire, and perception. The mind, in this framework, is simultaneously battlefield and laboratory. It is a battlefield because forces, both internal and external, converge to shape thought, emotion, and action. It is a laboratory because every influence, every suggestion, every subtle nudge provides data, offering insight into the structure of perception, the vulnerabilities of attention, and the mechanics of decision-making. The profound revelation is that the same mind that can be subtly guided by suggestion can also, once awakened, observe these currents and transform them into tools for self-mastery. The observer within the mind becomes not a passive recipient, but an active architect of consciousness. Consider the subtle interplay between internal biases and external influence. Every suggestion you encounter, whether a conversation, a fleeting visual stimulus, or a social expectation, does not act in isolation. It interacts with predispositions, prior experiences, and emotional patterns, creating a resonance that is unique to your consciousness. This is why two people presented with the same message respond so differently. The architecture of influence is not uniform, it is dynamically shaped by the mind itself. Influence is not a force acting upon a blank slate. It is a dialogue between the outer world and the inner world, between suggestion and resonance. And yet, there is a hidden symmetry here. The very same forces that can guide or manipulate can also illuminate and empower. Awareness of these currents allows one to trace the roots of desire, the origins of fear, the subtle shaping of belief. To recognize influence is to become fluent in the language of the mind, to discern the whispers that shape thought and the silent mechanics behind choice. In this recognition, the mind transforms from a passive instrument into an active field of creation. The shadows of manipulation, once revealed, become mirrors of consciousness itself. Power, in this metaphysical sense, emerges not from domination over others, but from sovereignty over oneself. The mastery of influence is not about controlling outcomes externally. It is about perceiving the hidden levers within, understanding the alignment of desire and attention, and navigating life with conscious intention. To act with awareness is to enter a dimension of freedom previously inaccessible, where choice is informed by insight rather than impulse, and action is guided by observation rather than reaction. Furthermore, the study of choice manipulation reveals a deeper principle. Reality itself responds to consciousness. What we perceive as external influence is often a reflection of internal patterns. Subtle nudges, synchronicities, and encounters can be seen not merely as random events, but as mirrors reflecting the state of awareness within. The metaphysics of choice teaches that perception, influence, and reality are intertwined. The observer and the observed are not separate, and mastery arises from understanding this interconnection. To awaken to this understanding is to inhabit a threshold. One stands between the known and the hidden, between the apparent autonomy of choice and the unseen currents that shape it. In this space, influence becomes a tool for insight rather than a trap. The mind, once opaque to its own conditioning, becomes luminous. The hidden strings that tug at thought become visible threads, each offering a path toward conscious creation. The metaphysics of choice is not merely a study of manipulation, it is an initiation into the structure of consciousness, a revelation that the mind itself is the key to freedom. Ultimately, the deep truth emerges. The external world, the currents of influence, and the subtle shaping of behavior are inseparable from the inner landscape of perception. Freedom is not the absence of influence, but the awareness of it. Power is not control over others, but mastery of the self. And reality, at its most profound level, responds not simply to action, but to conscious, awakened attention. To understand the metaphysics of choice is to step into this awakening, to perceive the hidden architectures that guide thought, and to claim sovereignty over the mind, turning the forces that once bound us into instruments of insight, clarity, and transformation. Perhaps you have felt moments when your own choices seemed uncertain, when the path you took left you questioning not just the decision, but the very essence of your own agency. Perhaps you have noticed the subtle tug of unseen forces shaping your desires, nudging your actions, whispering suggestions that you cannot fully trace. These experiences are not signs of weakness or failure, they are invitations. They are invitations to look deeper, to see not only the currents that move around you, but the shadows that move within you. The shadow is not an enemy. It is a reflection, a mirror revealing the hidden layers of consciousness that often go unnoticed. It is in these shadows that the mind's unseen architecture resides, a complex interplay of instincts, biases, fears, and unacknowledged longings that quietly shape perception. To encounter your shadow is to confront the parts of yourself that you deny or neglect, the impulses that contradict the image you hold of your own identity, the fears that linger in the margins of thought, the desires that feel both alien and familiar. Many avoid this confrontation, preferring comfort in self-illusion, yet the shadow is neither punishment nor obstacle. It is the doorway to profound self-understanding. In recognizing its presence, you begin to illuminate the invisible dynamics that have quietly guided your life. You see that some choices, some urges, even some recurring patterns are not random. They are conversations between the conscious self and the hidden architecture of influence, both within and without. This is where human experience becomes profoundly intimate. In acknowledging the shadow, you acknowledge your own complexity, the delicate interplay between free will and external guidance. The realization that influence operates both outside and inside your mind can be disorienting, even unsettling. Yet it is also liberating, for the recognition of these dynamics allows conscious intervention. You can begin to discern which impulses are authentic reflections of your deeper self, and which are echoes of patterns imposed by circumstance, culture, or other people. Awareness becomes a tool, a lens through which you can navigate the subtle, often invisible forces that shape your existence. Relationships, in this context, take on new depth. The people around you are not merely external influences, they are also mirrors reflecting aspects of your own shadow. Friction, conflict, admiration, and desire all illuminate hidden corners of consciousness. When someone triggers a strong emotional response in you, it is often a signal, a pointer toward parts of yourself that have not yet been integrated. By observing these reactions without judgment, by tracing the internal currents they reveal, you begin a process of profound self-recognition. This is not an intellectual exercise, it is a mystical engagement with the self, a process of seeing the hidden forces that operate silently behind perception and learning to navigate them with clarity and compassion. The shadow also reveals the interplay of fear and desire, the two forces most often manipulated without awareness. Fear can guide choices under the guise of caution, creating the illusion of protection while narrowing consciousness. Desire can be co-opted by suggestion, turning authentic longing into a response to external influence. Yet when observed with awareness, both fear and desire become instruments of insight. You learn to trace their origins, distinguish their true purpose, and act with intentionality rather than reflex. The shadows no longer control you, they instruct you, illuminate you, and guide you toward mastery of mind and perception. Ultimately, seeing yourself within the shadows is not a momentary realization, it is an ongoing process. The shadows are not fixed, they shift, evolve, and respond as awareness grows. What was once hidden gradually becomes visible. What once guided unconsciously can be engaged consciously. This process fosters not only personal clarity, but also a deeper understanding of the invisible forces at work in the world. You come to realize that influence, perception, and reality are entwined with the self in ways far more profound than ordinary awareness allows. By embracing the shadow, you step into a domain of wisdom and insight, where the unseen threads of choice and perception are revealed, where consciousness begins to guide its own path, and where the delicate interplay of external and internal forces transforms from an unseen constraint into a source of illumination and power. True freedom does not emerge from external circumstances. It does not reside in the absence of influence, nor is it granted by circumstance or fate. Freedom, in its deepest form, is the sovereignty of mind, the ability to perceive, choose, and act with awareness amid forces that would otherwise shape, bend, or direct thought without consent. To reclaim this sovereignty is to step into a dimension where influence becomes visible, where subtle nudges no longer act unnoticed, and where consciousness itself becomes the guiding principle of action. It is an awakening to the quiet but profound reality that power is not held in domination over the world, but in mastery over oneself. Awareness is the first tool of sovereignty. Begin by observing the impulses that arise before action, the small inclinations that shape choice, the subtle pressures that arise from environment, relationships, or social expectation. Notice how thoughts ripple through consciousness before reaching expression, how feelings of desire or fear emerge without apparent cause. Each observation is a thread, a connection to the hidden currents that guide behavior. As awareness deepens, these currents, once invisible, become readable, interpretable, and navigable. The mind, once a field of unconscious responses, begins to resemble a terrain that can be mapped, explored, and consciously traversed. But observation alone is not enough. Sovereignty also requires discernment, the ability to separate authentic intention from the echoes of suggestion. Not every thought, not every emotional impulse reflects the self. Some are inherited patterns, social imprints, or subtle manipulations arising from others or the world itself. Recognizing these layers is not an act of judgment, but an act of liberation. When you see the distinction between true intention and induced reaction, you can engage with life intentionally, rather than reactively, transforming what once enslaved the mind into instruments of insight and conscious choice. Action, guided by awareness, transforms the landscape of influence. When impulses are observed before being acted upon, when suggestions are recognized before being internalized, the very mechanics of manipulation lose their potency. Choice becomes deliberate, not coerced. Relationships shift from subtle control to conscious engagement. Decisions become extensions of insight rather than reflex. The mind, once at the mercy of invisible currents, asserts its sovereignty. Even when external influence persists, it can no longer operate as a hidden dominion. Awareness transforms the landscape from a field of constraint into a domain of conscious navigation. Sovereignty of mind also requires integration of the shadow. The impulses, fears, desires, and unacknowledged tendencies within are not obstacles to freedom. They are instruments of it. By observing and integrating these inner currents, by acknowledging the shadowed aspects of thought and emotion without rejection, the mind becomes whole, resilient, and less vulnerable to external manipulation. Influence no longer operates as coercion, because consciousness now illuminates the path before it. The inner landscape, once fragmented and reactive, becomes coherent and self-directed. The final element of reclaiming sovereignty is sustained practice. Conscious awareness is not a single act, but a continual engagement. Daily reflection, mindful observation of impulses, deliberate evaluation of choices, and attentive engagement with the world create a feedback loop of mastery. Each moment of intentional action strengthens the capacity to navigate the unseen forces of influence. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mind transitions from passive recipient to active creator. The currents of life, once turbulent and invisible, become discernible patterns, offering guidance rather than compulsion. In this awakening, the observer realizes that influence is neither entirely external nor purely oppressive. It is a mirror reflecting the mind's readiness to perceive, understand, and engage. Sovereignty of mind does not eliminate challenges, nor does it remove the presence of manipulation in the world. Instead, it transforms the relationship with these forces. The mind stands firm, perceiving, discerning, choosing, and acting with clarity. It becomes a lighthouse amidst the storm, a center of calm in a sea of currents, a conscious presence that navigates rather than being carried. Reclaiming the sovereignty of mind is the mystical act of becoming fully present, fully aware, and fully responsible for the architecture of one's consciousness. It is the realization that power begins within, that mastery is born from observation and discernment, and that freedom is not a gift from the world, but a creation of the awakened self. Within this practice lies liberation, the capacity to move through life with intention, wisdom, and a profound understanding of the subtle forces that shape thought, choice, and reality. The world will continue to whisper its suggestions, to nudge, to tempt, and to guide. But now you stand in a new dimension, where awareness has illuminated the hidden currents. Influence no longer moves unnoticed. It is visible, interpretable, and no longer threatening. The shadows that once seemed to constrain your choices have become mirrors, reflecting not only the subtle forces around you, but also the profound complexity of your own mind. In this quiet triumph of awareness, you perceive the unseen architecture of thought and choice, understanding that what once appeared as manipulation is also a reflection of opportunity. The opportunity to engage consciously, to navigate life with clarity, and to act with sovereignty. The mastery of perception is not a dramatic conquest, nor is it an external victory over the world. It is the subtle, enduring realization that the mind itself is the field in which all forces converge, and that freedom is not defined by the absence of influence, but by the conscious engagement with it. The observer within you now recognizes that the currents of desire, fear, and suggestion are neither enemies nor prisons. They are instruments, mirrors, and guides. Each subtle push, each fleeting impression, each impulse that once seemed random is now a teacher, a reflection, a part of the vast dialogue between consciousness and reality. Even the seemingly mundane events of life acquire new significance. The glance of a stranger, the phrasing of a conversation, the rhythm of routine, all become aspects of a subtle dance between perception and influence. With awareness, these forces no longer pull unconsciously. They become intelligible patterns, offering insight into the mind, the world, and the self. The external currents of persuasion do not vanish, but the mind, now fully illuminated, navigates them with poise. Where once you may have felt guided by invisible hands, now you move in conscious harmony with the hidden structures of reality, turning every encounter into a reflection of insight rather than control. In this final stage, the distinction between external and internal influence dissolves. What you perceive in the world is inseparable from the landscape of the mind. Choice, intention, and awareness converge. The shadows of manipulation, both within and without, have revealed themselves to be mirrors, reflections of the mind's readiness to perceive, discern, and act. The space between impulse and action, once invisible, is now luminous. Here lies the true triumph, not in eliminating influence, but in transforming it into a source of wisdom and understanding. The quiet triumph of awareness is not loud or ostentatious. It is subtle, enduring, and profoundly intimate. It is the realization that freedom has always been within reach, waiting for recognition. It is the capacity to witness, interpret, and engage with life while remaining centered in consciousness. In this state, the mind moves through influence as an artist moves through canvas, with intention, clarity, and a profound appreciation for the unseen patterns that shape reality. And finally, there is a stillness that accompanies this awareness, not the absence of activity, but the presence of understanding. The mind no longer reacts blindly. It observes, it discerns, it chooses. The shadows are not feared. They are acknowledged, integrated, and transformed into guides. Influence is no longer a source of unseen power over you. It is a reflection of the mind's capacity to engage with reality consciously, creatively, and wisely. In this quiet triumph, the cycle is complete. The mind has recognized its own sovereignty, the currents of influence have become instruments of insight, and the world, once a complex maze of manipulation and suggestion, is now a mirror reflecting consciousness itself. In this luminous realization, you understand that the journey does not end. Awareness is not a destination, it is a practice, a continuous engagement with life, perception, and choice. The subtle architecture of influence will continue to operate, yet now it dances in harmony with the awakened mind. Each moment becomes an opportunity for conscious engagement, each decision a reflection of clarity, and each experience a mirror of both the inner and outer worlds. The quiet triumph of awareness is the eternal recognition that freedom is born not from escaping the currents of influence, but from understanding them, navigating them, and allowing them to illuminate the profound depths of consciousness itself.